Good evening. Today is Thursday, June 25th, 2020, and I'll call this Fairfield City School District Regular Board of Education meeting to order. Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Begley?
Here.
Mr. Birding?
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum?
Here.
Mrs. O'Neill?
Here.
Mrs. Shorter?
Here.
Okay, would you please all rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it's good to be back in the boardroom and to be back inside the school building. And we have Mr. Begley and myself in person, and we have school board members Belina Shorter and Carrie O'Neill and Jerry Gundrum coming via Zoom. So they are also present at this meeting. The first item for business is presentations and resolutions. I'll turn it over to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Birding, and members of the board. We do have one presentation scheduled this evening. I will be making a presentation regarding the reopening of our schools at the start of the 2020-2021 school year. So I will jump right in. Gina will be controlling the PowerPoint virtually, and so I want to thank Gina for doing that, sharing the page with other board members in our community as well. So prior to jumping right into the presentation, I do want to take just a few minutes to emphasize some very important parts of the presentation, and you may hear a few of these things repeated throughout the presentation this evening. First and foremost, as a district, we are planning for the beginning. We are planning to welcome students back face-to-face for the beginning of the 2020-2021 school year. We will make our buildings as safe as possible for our students and our staff members. However, we do want to be transparent. We want to be clear. There is a level of risk regarding the COVID-19 virus. We do anticipate that we will have confirmed COVID cases in each of our school buildings. It is simply inevitable. The third point I'd like to make before getting into the presentation is that if parents are not comfortable sending their children into our school buildings, we will have remote learning opportunities. And I will go into more detail on that topic in a few minutes as I work my way through the presentation. And probably the most important piece of information I can share this evening, other than the fact that we are planning for a face-to-face return, is that the information I share today is what we know as of today, June 25th. It could change tomorrow, it could change next week, it could change August 1st, and it could even change once we get into the start of the new school year. We have been told that we should be prepared to change everything we do on a dime, and we are doing our best to be prepared for just about any scenario that we may face. However, I do want to say it's very difficult to plan with little or no guidance. We've talked about that at several of our other meetings in the past, that we were expecting to receive some guidance. I think initially it was mid-May. That got moved to late May. June 1st was a hard date that we were given. Then we were told it might be 2 weeks later, middle of June. Then we were given the hard date of June 20th, the 22nd. We were told yesterday, maybe the day before, that it would be today, that we might hear from the governor. Today we were told that it would be next Tuesday, June 30th. So it's just very difficult to plan. And one thing I will say, I also want to add, in regard to change, I know that other states are starting to come out. Some are giving guidance to school districts, and some are providing mandates. in the state of Ohio, we don't anticipate receiving mandates, but I think that that could also change. For example, in the state of Kentucky, I believe that all students are going to be required to wear masks. As of today, that is not a mandate from the state of Ohio, but that is certainly subject to change. And as mandates, if those kinds of mandates are handed down to us, then we will act accordingly and provide our students and our staff members, our parents and our community with updates as those kinds of things occur, if they do. All right, so at this time, I'd like to get into the presentation, starting off with some general principles that will guide us as we move forward with the reopening of our schools. First and foremost, we will implement recommended safety protocols to the highest degree possible. A few examples of that: upon entering our buildings, all staff will have their temperature taken. That will happen every single day. Staff members will also be required to complete a health questionnaire prior to gaining access to the building. So that's something, that questionnaire, we are probably revising that as we speak. Initially, that questionnaire was fairly simple, and I believe those items are, do you have a temperature? Do you have COVID-19 symptoms? And then you had to initial. Just recently, we were advised that we should be specific on that sign-in sheet for our staff members as the virus has evolved. There are now more symptoms to having the virus than there were back in March, April, and May. So that's a small change that we will make on that sign-in sheet for our staff. We will continue to work closely with the Butler County General Health District to promote safety in each of our buildings. We will work with them when we have a confirmed case of COVID-19 to ensure that all protocols are appropriately followed. They will provide us with guidance, some recommendations regarding how we proceed. I will give a quick example. Prior to the shutdown in March, we did have a few instances where, and there was some uncertainty that someone had tested. We were in communication on and off with the Butler County General Health District for about 6 hours. In the end, we decided to err on the side of caution, and I believe we closed that school for a day so that we could sanitize appropriately. It's very possible, on that particular day, it was shared with us that we didn't necessarily need to do that, but we felt like it was the right thing to do with the uncertainties at the time. I can't say today, if we have a case in August, September, October, each and every time, things may change between June 25th and August 17th. In fact, they will. One thing that I will say about being transparent with our parents and our community is that we will continue to be transparent about the level of risk that is present for our students and our employees that occupy our facilities. In the past, we have notified parents of the school building where there was a concern. Over the summer, we had a situation in which an employee who came in to assist had tested positive, and we notified the parents of students that attended that particular building in case their child had come in to pick up some of their belongings over the summer. And we plan to continue to be transparent with our families and our community. The next thing I want to talk about is just we realize the need for consistency in areas of operations, but also recognize and want people to understand that not every classroom is the same size, and not every classroom has the same style of furniture. So it's impossible for all classrooms to have the same configuration. Some classrooms may be able to social distance a little bit more than some of the other classrooms, or teachers may be able to arrange their room that sets up for social distancing in a better way than maybe someone down the hallway. And then the last thing I want to say under general principles is that we plan to maintain the previously board-approved school calendar. There have been some districts that have made some changes to their calendar. At this time, we don't think that is necessary. We also see that as yet another change that our families would have to make. You know, if they were anticipating sending their child back to school on the first day of school and we delay that by 3 days, then they would have to make some arrangements. But again, we just really don't think that's necessary at this time. If something changes and just think something happens that we are not anticipating, that may become necessary. But at this time, we just don't see that as being necessary. The next topic I'd like to move on to would be classrooms. We will have hand sanitizing stations in our classrooms. And as I've said, any student who attends school will incur some level of risk, but we will do our best to decrease the likelihood of infection. Hygiene practices, reminding students, discussing that with our students and our staff, enhanced cleaning protocols and safety procedures, but being in a public place does have a certain level of risk that cannot be eliminated. Also continuing under classrooms, face coverings are highly recommended for all students when they come to school, but they are not required. Again, highly recommended for students. School employees, on the other hand, will be required to use a face covering when they are within 6 feet of students, so that close proximity. So, you know, some of our staff members will probably adapt. Well, not probably, they will. They have to. You will see some changes in small groups, and you will see some changes. You know, a teacher may, you know, typically may be closer to the students, but may choose to be 6 feet away so that he or she doesn't need to wear the face covering. The next topic I'd like to talk about is remote learning. So just a few things I'd like to touch on under remote learning. One, we have surveyed our parents regarding how remote learning was provided in the spring. We are also surveying them about their intentions for the fall. Do they plan to send their child back to school? Are they interested in remote learning through the Fairfield City School District if they do not plan to send them back? And that data will help us as we plan for reopening at the start of the year. And I do want to say that our school district will offer remote learning for students whose families are not comfortable sending their children back to school. I also want to say this: remote learning will look a lot different than it did in the spring. As a result of the survey that we gave our parents, we received some outstanding feedback. I'd probably say the best feedback, or the biggest factor, the thing we heard over and over again from parents was, can we just simplify how we go to find assignments instead of going to a lot of different locations, different websites, so on and so forth. That's just one small example. But again, I just want to be clear, it will be different. We still don't, we're not prepared to paint a picture of exactly what remote learning will look like because we are still working on it. And there are several other things that are in that same category this evening. But that is something that we are working on. And we, like I said, we recognized the need for improvements. But I will say that given the circumstance, all of our employees did a wonderful job. We appreciated the patience from our students and our parents as we just had to adjust in a matter of days to provide an instruction remotely. So in closing, under remote learning, I'd like to just clarify parents and guardians will have two options. One, they can send their children to school face-to-face and assume some level of risk, or they can agree to a remote learning plan from home for one semester at a time. That is something that we will include in that remote learning plan. Students will not be permitted to come in and out of remote learning. That would not be manageable to have a large number of students, jumping back and forth between face-to-face instruction and remote learning. At the same point in time, we want to be flexible, so that's why we decided, at this time, well, one semester at a time. So if they do it for half of the school year and they decide, you know what, this isn't working for me, I'm ready to go face-to-face, and they want to come back, then we will welcome them back at the end of that semester. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about transportation. Our district will attempt to seat siblings together. Seating charts are required on each bus to assist with contact tracing if that is ever needed. Face coverings are required for our drivers, and once again, strongly encouraged for students. Again, face coverings required for drivers and strongly encouraged for students. We understand that, parents and guardians may not want to have their child on the bus. We will still be providing the service, but, if parents don't feel comfortable having their children ride with those guidelines in place, they certainly may choose to provide their own form of transportation. That is certainly their choice. And I do want to add, just with transportation, there was a lot of discussion during the early part of the summer about social distancing and what that would look like for transportation. And there was discussion about having one student per seat, every other seat. With the number of students that we transport, with the number of tiers that we have, the number of drivers and buses, if we were to be held to that kind of mandate, I just can't see it happening. In order for us to adhere to those kinds of mandates, we would have to hire more drivers, buy a lot more buses, and change all of our starting times, and we would have buses running all day long and into the evening. We just couldn't manage it. And a lot of districts found themselves in that same position, which I think is part of the reason that we don't have the mandates that they were thinking about implementing early in the summer. A few other topics I would just like to touch on briefly tonight under additional topics. One is food service. That is another category where we are still in the planning phase for lunch service, and we will release more information when that plan is finalized. Again, the kinds of things we are considering there, similar to riding a school bus, is you have all of these students in one location sitting next to each other. So we are trying to work our way through that, collaborate with some of our neighboring districts, and just kind of get some other ideas. And again, that's something we're talking about each and every day. And once we finalize that plan, we will announce that to our public. Visitors and volunteers. Visitors and volunteers, as of today, will be discouraged from being in our classrooms because of the risk. Again, we've stated that there is a risk, but anything we can do to minimize that risk, we'd like to do so. And discouraging folks from visiting our classrooms is one way that we can do that. I will say that I think this language may change prior to the start of the school year. I would not be surprised if we tighten the restrictions. Right now it's discouraged. We may tighten that restriction on visitors and volunteers as we get closer to the start of the year. Safety protocols such as the health questionnaire and taking temperatures will be implemented for all visitors and volunteers, so we will treat them as staff members if they come into our building. And then lastly, all visitors and volunteers are required to wear a face covering. If they do come into the building, and we are allowing them to come in, so they'll go through those protocols, but they will be required to wear a face covering. Next topic I'd like to talk about is recess. Again, we'll make every effort to maintain consistency with established safety procedures, encourage kids to social distance. While they are on recess, we may limit access to certain pieces of equipment that may be difficult to clean, or we need to limit access because that will help us with practicing social distancing. Activities that are considered high touch will also be restricted. And then lastly, under that category, students must sanitize their hands after recess. Field trips, that is something we are in the planning phase. For field trips, we will release more information when the plan is finalized. I do expect significant restrictions on field trips. I could see no overnight field trips, could be no field trips in general. Like I said, I expect significant restrictions on student field trips. Closing comments, again, this is kind of going back and restating some of the comments I made during the introduction. We are planning to be face-to-face at the beginning of the school year, as of today. We will make our buildings as safe as possible for our students and our staff members, but acknowledge that there is a level of risk in doing so. Again, if parents are not comfortable sending their children to school, we will offer those remote learning opportunities. And then almost at the end, the information I share today could change anytime. And if it does, I mean, we expect it, to be honest, we expect it to change. Because that's that's par for the course since March. Things have been changing rapidly. One of the last things that I will add this evening, one of the things that I've been considering is maybe creating a district email address for our parents who have specific questions about reopening. And as we are able to answer those questions, creating an FAQ section for the entire community and posting that. So as those questions come in, we will distribute those to the appropriate party and then post those once we're able to answer them on the FAQ so that people can go on and view them. So that's something I just was thinking about as I was putting this presentation together this evening. And then my last comment is just, we appreciate everyone's patience and trust as we navigate through this very complex issue. So that is all of the information I have this evening, but I will be happy to entertain any questions that you have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions from the board?
Yes. Yep, I've got some.
Mrs. Shorter?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Billy. As we talked a little earlier this week, making the classroom setting as safe as possible is definitely important. There are going to be certain kids that won't be able to, I guess, tolerate the risk. So, we're not really able to ascertain what that risk level is or quantify that. Quantifying that risk, involves so many factors that we really can't predict. What we do know is that the rates of infection are actually going up. It's getting pretty bad with at least half of the United States. And the numbers in Hamilton County and Warren County are definitely pretty high right now. So it's only a matter of time before Butler County's numbers are, going to start to climb as well. So yeah, parents will need to know that there is definitely a certain amount of risk in placing your child in the classroom environment. One of the things that I'm hoping we can look into and possibly adopt, and looking at what's recommended by some of the experts that talk about what it takes to make a school safe in the age of COVID is one of the things that I mentioned to you. And apparently there is some support for it it's the idea of cleaning the air indoors. I mentioned having some type of air assessment. What's your ventilation rate? What's the airflow, the dynamics in that, particular classroom in a building? Some classes are smaller. Some classes are a little stuffier than others. I would love to see an assessment in our buildings ahead of school starting. Some of the things that have been suggested would be utilizing HEPA filters and portable air purifiers. Basically, just looking at what the airflow is in those rooms, doing an assessment, and having a focus on air cleaning. One of the things that we're doing that I think is a really good thing is making sure that we have access to hand cleaners and things like that. That's good, but the biggest part of infection transmission is actually with droplets, person to person. And if we are not going to make it mandatory that everybody in the classroom, students and teachers, wear masks, then our level of risk definitely increases. I mean, it's hard to quantify it in the beginning, but it definitely increases. And what I'd love to see is that we go off and look at what it would take to make sure that our the air in our buildings in these classrooms is assessed, and that we do the best that we can for this. I think it's extremely important. I just don't, I wouldn't feel comfortable sending my kid into a room unless I knew something had been done to at least look at it, to at least address it. Because if you're in a stagnant classroom, that's a classroom where, COVID, which you don't have to have symptoms. So having a fever check is not going to catch 60% of that type of possible transmission, since you don't have to have symptoms to pass it on. In the first 7 days before you show one single symptom is when you're most infectious. At least that's what the studies are showing. So I would love for us to look at the air assessment. I would love for us to challenge things a little bit, even if Governor DeWine does not make a mandate that masks are, a must. We should try and do that, because it just doesn't make sense if you're going to have half the classroom with masks and half the class without. That's a different environment than creating stipulations that everybody in the class has to have it. Legally, I'm sure that there's some obstacles, but I don't think that we should allow, that small majority or small minority of people who don't want to wear masks at all influence what is best for the overall health of all of our kids. We should make that mandatory. It's my opinion. And we should definitely do something about looking at the air cleaning. So I'll recommend an article by Joseph G. Allen. He's a Harvard professor. It's in the Washington Post. It was published yesterday. And he does make the case as to why kids definitely need to go back to school. There are some points you may agree with, some you may not. But I wanted to just look at his plans. What would be his recommendations, since we don't have anything yet from the state, because the governor and his department and the CDC should be doing this, really. So in light of not having a plan yet, I think we have to be proactive and go out and figure out some things ourselves. There's been yet another delay in getting this information at the state level, and it's upsetting. I can't say how disappointed I am in not seeing it. It's really a bone of contention with me. It's just not right. We should have something. We should have guidelines by now. We really should.
Well,
being put in an untenable position.
So I would like to just make a few comments before the other board members weigh in on those topics. But Blaine, I talked with you earlier this week, and you shared those concerns. And I did reach out to a decent number of superintendents in the area and ask if there were if any of them were considering doing any air assessments in their buildings. That was not something that other school districts were planning on doing. However, I did speak with Joe and ask him to ask around as well, and he did, and he had the same results that I did. However, he is going to get some information on doing some form of assessment and find out what the cost of that would be, and then that is something that we could bring back to the board and, for consideration, or, we will have to work through that once we have more information on that topic. And then I will definitely check out the article that you referenced. Well, the other thing I wanted to add is that I did see something that Governor DeWine, when they announced that it was being pushed back till June 30th, I read something that said he made a comment that those would just be guidelines and there would be no surprises. So I do not anticipate that those guidelines that are released next week, I'm not anticipating any guidelines, and I think guidelines is the key word versus mandates. And not that, it's not that we have to do the same thing that everyone else is doing, but I will tell you that while all of the schools in Butler County, our plans are not identical, they are very similar. We are not on an island. We've been meeting with each other at least once a week all summer, sometimes twice. Also meeting with the health commissioners as well. So these are topics that have had a lot of discussion, but again, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and so I just wanted to share those comments, and I'll allow the other board members to weigh in on those topics.
Thanks, Billy, I appreciate it.
No problem. You're very welcome.
Any other comments?
I have some comments and questions. First of all, just a comment. I'm happy to see you guys there sitting in familiar territory. It's good to see Mr. Birding, Mr. Bagley in school grounds. So I feel like this is a small step, but I'm glad to see you there. I do have several questions, actually. The first, I know you said you were going to take staff's temperature. Are you worried at all about, or have you thought through like timing of that, or are you worried about adding to their school day, any of that kind of stuff? Have you thought through how that will happen?
Yeah, so that's something we've been doing in our administration building all summer long, which has a decent number of employees. And also, while staff members in the buildings have an established report time, they generally, a lot of people get there, maybe an hour early, 45 minutes, 30 minutes. So I don't anticipate that being an issue, but if it becomes an issue to the point where we have a line of employees and, to get in, then we may have to create a second station for them to get their temperatures taken, because, we don't want them to stand in line for long periods of time.
Sure. And I know you said the remote learning is still in planning phases. Do you think it's the same teachers that are doing the remote learning that are doing if you have Mrs. Funk for your regular class, do you also have Mrs. Funk for your online learning, or are those different teachers?
It's too early to say what that might look like. We're just still having a lot of discussion around that in terms of what that would look like.
Sure.
It's possible to be connected in some way, but again, it's just too early to tell. But we're, Mandy's with us, and she's on some committees. She has a lot of teachers that are, and administrators that are on some district-level committees, and that's something we're talking about each and every day and trying to iron out those details.
And when will parents, I guess, decide that? When do they get that option to say, I want to go in person or I want to go online for this semester, this quarter?
Yeah, so I'll make a general comment, and if Mandy has something to add, she certainly can, but, I'm not sure if that survey is still open, so we have a survey out there for parents asking them what their
Yeah.
plans are, and I think we're hovering around 10%, or we were about the last time I spoke with Mandy. That would
10% have replied or 10%?
10% that would prefer online learning,
Okay,
or
okay.
remote learning. So, but we do anticipate setting a hard date for those families so that we can prepare appropriately. And I would envision, again, maybe end of July-ish, but I don't want to speak out of turn if Mandy has a different idea.
Yeah, I can just add that, right now, what we're talking about at the county level or with other schools in Butler County and Warren County, Preble County, is, pretty much that we need to define for our families exactly what that remote learning experience will look like and what it will entail, because it'll look very different than it did in the spring. And so we want to make sure that we have all of those details ironed out so we can say, these are your options, so that there aren't any surprises. But like Mr. Smith said, I would assume, or would want to work toward like an end of July date for them to officially make that call.
And they will know before the end of July date how it looks different? I don't know how it looks different, but they'll know before they make the decision how it looks different?
Yes.
And that,
Are you able to give me any information on how it would look different?
Well, there are some.
I know it's in the works, so.
So, I mean, for example, last year when we went into remote learning, kids were already attached to a teacher and they
Right.
be attached to that teacher. In this particular case, we probably won't be assigning students to like Mrs. Funk, and Mrs. Funk won't be doing double duty in terms of teaching the students who are face to face with her and those remote learning students. So the survey has kind of told us that we're going to have a large enough population that those students will probably be treated as their own separate cohort.
Mm-hmm.
So that will just look different.
Yeah.
And it alleviates too some of the stress and the pressure off of our teachers because, teaching in a classroom every day with kids just looks different than teaching online, so.
And I imagine that looks different if you're in kindergarten versus if you're a senior.
Yes, and that's the other thing that we're trying to work through because there are a lot of great like online programs that we could purchase, especially for our secondary students that there aren't as many for our younger students. And so, we're just trying to kind of share what that looks like. Is there a platform that allows us to kind of personalize things or, do we need to collectively create content across the county that we can share?
Mm-hmm. No, that's good information. Thank you. My last question is kind of totally in a different direction, just about after-school activities. Have we thought through, or how does any of this affect after-school activities?
yeah, so, we have different kinds of after-school activities, and,
Right.
and the fact that we have the Ohio School Athletic Association, kind of takes, they actually, they provide us and have been all along guidelines. That's one area where we didn't have to wait. We do have our student athletes that are working out, conditioning, doing off-season training in small groups. If they're indoors, they are wearing masks or face coverings. But so that's one of the things that we have struggled with in terms of some of the summer requests, that we go to the Butler County General Health District, and so they are kind of overseeing those kinds of things, but you have OHSAA over here overseeing others. So as of right now, we haven't received any kind of guidelines that tells us that, after-school activities need to be modified other than the same way that we need to modify the things that happen during the school day. Social distance as much as possible. There would be a level of threat regarding the virus. So, but that's kind of where we are today. But again, it's certainly possible we could get additional guidance that may change that.
And I guess maybe a follow-up question on that after-school activities. So do we have any idea on marching band season or football season? Or, some of that, to me, like marching band, as you travel to away games, kind of falls under student field trips in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Right.
Is there decisions on any of that yet?
So far, we haven't had conversations around those topics. I think probably because we've just been so focused on, are we coming back face to face?
Sure,
We have to make
sure.
that decision first, and then once we make that decision, which is, I'm glad that we're able to do this on June 25th, because now that gives us, the sooner we make that decision, the more time we have to talk through all of these scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think now after we do this presentation, we will start to have a lot more questions, and we'll just keep having more and more conversation about those kinds of things.
I have another question. It's something that I've been wondering about specifically. For those kids that are in choir, have we looked at how that's going to be, how that's going to look? Choir specifically with that activity, that's a higher risk activity. How does that, have we thought about how that's going to look?
We have not had any conversations specifically about choir. I have heard, some, in one of the meetings I was in, some made a comment that some other districts were having that conversation, but it's not a conversation that we entered into. Again, mainly because we were trying to make a decision about, are we going to try to go face-to-face, or are we going to look at remote learning? But now that we've, had this presentation and these announcements, those are the kinds of things, choir, other activities, marching band, that we will start to have discussions around.
Okay.
Mrs. Gundram, do you have any questions?
Mainly my only question, and I think Carrie already asked it, was about the logistics of the temperature taking. But I did wonder after that if perhaps the district had looked into thermal readers as a way. I know some other facilities have used those as a way to take sort of mass temperatures without and get people through as quickly as possible.
Was that question about thermal readers, Jerry?
Yes.
Joe, I'm going to defer to you and let you speak to that.
Sure. We've at least looked at it a little bit. I've had discussions with my peers about it also. At this point, no one that I know of is doing anything with those. They are using no-touch temperature scanners, though, at this point. So anything is possible. It just depends on how the people flow in, and if it's something that's not necessary based on everything working, with just a normal thermometer that's a no-touch to skin, we'll probably proceed in that direction and continue to. And I believe our peer districts are very similar in that.
Okay. Mr. Begley, you have questions?
Yeah, I do. I have one thought and one question. I think it's really prudent that you continue these close talks with other superintendents, local health officials. We learn from each other. We create, I think, in essence, our own path. I'm concerned, like Ms. Shorter and the others, that I could see, and of course I don't know, but I could see the governor using the state's size and population dispersal as an excuse for not creating statewide guidelines, certainly statewide mandates, and pushing that back on us to create our own. So being on the same page with other similar-sized districts that are obviously geographically very close to us makes a lot of sense. So I think that's a great idea. My question, if we can think back prior to pre-COVID days, Mrs. Ogg and her team did a great job presenting information on one-to-one technology. And the game plan is to start that this year at least the high school level. Where does that stand in terms of both getting our equipment in and assimilated in time, and how that might obviously assist with the remote learning piece?
So the last time I talked with Mr. McKinney, we were aware that there was going to be a delay in the delivery of those devices because of COVID-19. The government had first priority on devices, and obviously there was a very large demand. Last I spoke with him a few weeks ago, we were looking at a late August arrival, which is 7 to 10 days after the start of the year. But since he's here this evening, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but any update on that, Jeff?
I just talked to our distributor, our Dell, 2 days ago, and we're still on track for August 28th. They haven't changed any of the dates. Obviously,
Can you repeat that for us once he's done talking?
Yes. For those of you virtually and at home, we are still anticipating an August 28th arrival, so still the end of the month on those one-to-one devices.
So do you have, as best you can lay out, a logistical game plan for unboxing and downloading software and doing all the things you have to do to prepare thousands of units for use?
yeah, we have all of our devices imaged at the factory, so we push them an image, we push Dell an image, where when the device gets to us, it already has all the software, everything on it. We still have to unbox every machine, we have to turn on every machine, we have to tag every machine. There's still definitely some legwork that we have to do on our end, but I think my team can get that fairly quick, probably within 2 or 3 day turnaround.
They do this every summer.
What?
I said, you do this every summer.
We do this every summer. We are very, very skilled at getting that done. So yeah, I feel that we can turn them around fairly quick once they show up.
So for those that are virtual, Mr. McKinney was just explaining that once we get the devices in, approximately August 28th, our tech folks can turn that around in 2 to 3 days and get those devices out. So once we get them in, it will be a very quick turnaround. So unless there are changes, that means we would anticipate getting those devices in the hands of our, getting those out to our building early September-ish, as long as nothing changes.
And so then this might be a question for Mrs. Ogg. Do you anticipate, what would you anticipate the learning curve to be for teachers and obviously for students to make that a functional part of remote learning for our students?
So I would anticipate the learning curve for the students will be very small. I mean, they're on devices all the time. For the teachers, a lot of our teachers, especially this past spring when we were shut down, they engaged in different professional development opportunities that we offered to, kind of learn how to use different tools and also to talk through, different pedagogy around a blended learning model. And how to use those devices in the classroom and, of course, when we were at home. So the other thing, or a couple of other things that we're doing, we're going to continue that professional development in early August during our optional PD days for teachers. And then the other thing that we are just getting ready to finalize here in the next week or so is our continuity of learning plan. So you guys might remember that from March, early April. It was basically, this is what the day will look like. This is what students can expect. So what we did in June with a team of teachers and administrators is we went back through that document. We took into consideration the feedback we got from students, parents, and teachers on the surveys that we sent out. And we revised that continuity of learning plan. And one of the things that Mr. Smith mentioned was the desire to have consistency in content delivery platforms, communication, all those things. And so we feel like we've streamlined some of that. And so once we release that document, teachers will have, kind of more direction on what they should focus their time and energy on. And then we'll provide professional development to help them learn those tools. And what we're going to then encourage, and it says this in the document, we encourage teachers to start using these tools and teaching these processes from day one in their classroom. So how do you log on to your email? How do you log into Google Classroom? This is something that we're going to use. This is how you engage in it. So I think having those devices, especially in the hands of our 9 through 12 students, will be a tremendous advantage for those teachers, because from day one, they will be able to put protocols in place that would support a blended or remote learning environment if we have to switch to that next year.
Speaking of that, I just kind of have a follow-up question to that, Mrs. Aub. Has the state given us any guidance on a certain percentage of COVID cases that require you to move to all online versus being in person? Has there been any certain number that has been made public?
Not that I have heard. I haven't heard any discussion of that at all.
No, and I can confirm that. Yeah, we have not received a number, and I don't anticipate that it will be a number. I think that, right now, I think all of us know that there is a spike occurring across the country, and I think they monitor that closely. And just, similar to in March, it wasn't about a number. It was just that they thought it was in the best interest of everyone to close down and move to remote learning. I don't get a sense that they will have a number or a percentage, but anything is possible.
Anybody else have any questions? I just have a couple, Mr. Smith. The first, Mrs. Shorter brought up the idea of requiring masks. I know that would be very difficult to enforce. And what would happen if a student showed up without a mask? Where do we send that student out of the classroom? So I know that would be one obstacle. But I'm wondering, and I'm not requesting, I'm wondering, is there, if we have a survey that says we're going to have X number of students remote because their parents don't feel safe sending their kids to school, is there a possibility to having a classroom at a grade level dedicated to kids that don't want to wear masks, or families that want their students to only be around children wearing masks? Is that a possibility? I'm not asking us to do that, just is that something that, if that's a question on the survey, if the question is, do you want your child to wear a mask, and we have X number of parents saying, no, I don't want my child wearing a mask, is that something that we could use those numbers to determine, set aside classrooms?
Right. I'll have a general response to the second part of that question, and Mandy can certainly chime in if she chooses. But I think it would be difficult, if not impossible, to create class schedules based on a student's desire to wear a mask or not wear a mask. I think that on a number of levels. One of the things that I think about that sometimes, especially at the high school, we only have X number of offerings of a class, and we may only have one. That's one of the first things that come to mind. We also have, we do have some classes that, what if we have this math class that, 25 students are supposed to be in this math class, at our middle school, but, and we only have it one time during the day, but that class is divided in terms of desires to wear a mask or not wear a mask. The other part of the question about, what would we do if a student refuses to wear a mask or a parent refuses to have their child wear a mask? That I think that would be a very large issue in our district, and I'm just speaking my truth here. I just think that wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, you probably have 50% that want to wear a mask, have strong feelings about wearing a mask, and 50% that don't have strong feelings on the other side. One of the things we talked about, and I shared with Belina when I talked to her, even if wearing a mask was required to ride the bus, what do we do when a second grader, shows up to the bus stop and doesn't have a mask? Do we send them home to a home that may be empty? Maybe their parents went to work. They can't get the child doesn't have a cell phone. The bus is sitting there waiting for other kids to board. Yes, certainly we could have some masks there to distribute. But then what if I guess if it's required, but again, you may have quite a few parents that say, no, do not put a mask on my child. I don't want my child to wear a mask. You should have called me to ask before you placed a mask on my child's face or face covering. So a very complex issue. It's not just here, it's everywhere. But there's just and that's the reason that a lot of school districts have landed where they have landed when it comes to masks and not requiring them to do so because they don't think that it's manageable when you serve 10,000 students and 2,400 in this building and 800 at the freshman school. There will be a lot of focus on addressing mask issues versus teaching and learning. And I know that some people may disagree with that, and that's okay. I understand that perspective. I'm just sharing the feedback from that we hear from both sides.
Mr. Smith, if I may add on that as well. In the elementary schools, when they develop classes, they try to balance those classes between male and female, low-performing, mid-performing, and high-performing students. There are carefully placed clusters of gifted students and EL students and special needs students. There are so many different dimensions that we work to try to get an even class. And I think to divide students based on whether they have face coverings or do not have face coverings may create classrooms that are maybe socioeconomically unbalanced because some may or may not be able to, provide masks. And the other thing, and Mr. Smith alluded to this as well, the management issue, if masks are required and then to be on their faces all day long, that's a difficult task to manage. I would suspect that 10, 15, 20, 25% of a teacher's time will be spent in saying, put on your mask, leave that mask alone, adjust your mask, it's not covering your nose, to make sure that it's being properly worn. I believe that would be a huge, difficult task for our teachers.
Well, if I might add, the suggestions that I've seen basically call out that you have to give the kids a break from the mask, that it has to be managed. because what I think needs to be said is this. There's been 120,000 people that have died as a result of this virus. We have an active pandemic that has not gone away and will probably, in all likelihood, increase. Demographics show that there are certain people that are more prone to it. I don't know if we're really prepared for what is coming if you don't do some of the basic things. And to me, a basic thing is to require that everyone wears that mask in class. I think we're kidding ourselves. The reason the curve is flattened and the reason things aren't much worse than they are, I 100% believe is because we didn't have kids clustered in classrooms together. This virus loves the types of environments, prisons, hospitals, nursing homes. A school environment is a perfect environment. I think we better just prepare ourselves for some things because I don't think we're really thinking about the impact that this really could have. I mean, I think about it every single day. I've had people in my family that have been impacted by this disease, so I know it's real, but I don't think that everyone believes that it is. It's coming. And so we better be prepared for what things could wind up looking like. And I'm not sure that the majority of people really understand that the reason it's not as bad as it could have been is because we did switch to an online learning environment. Just imagine all of those kids. If we had kept the whole schedule as we were, all of those kids going home to their parents who have high risk in some cases, just think about that impact. We know that kids do pretty well, but it's not necessarily the case that their parents will do well. And so I would just, we better think about this. I know it seems the easier path to walk in not requiring those masks. I know we think that's the easier path, but that just may not be the easier path when things start to happen. When things start to happen and, you know, the numbers of viruses increase first. The lagging factor are the critical morbidities that lead to deaths. And so you may have kids who are perfectly fine, but their parents aren't. And what happens when those numbers get to a certain level? And we look back and, you know, there's a question of, did we do all that we could to reduce the risk? Did we take that daring leadership to buck the grain or, you know, buck the trend to do what we thought was really best to save lives, not just our children, but their parents and grandparents? And I am terrified. I understand that not everybody sees this as a big deal or, you know, of a serious risk, but I assure you that it is. It is, and we will see it. If we don't do everything that we can, we will see it, mark our words. I'm almost sure. I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I understand not everybody sees it the way I do.
No, I always appreciate hearing your input and your perspective. And I do feel good in the sense that there's at least a choice for parents if they want to go back in person or online.
Right.
You know, every child is coming home to a different environment. So I feel like that puts a little bit of the choice and back into the parents' hands or the guardian's hands. They know if they're coming back to a situation that's a parent at high risk or if they're coming back to a parent that's not at high risk. So I appreciate that we have some options.
Yeah, I do too. I just want to make sure that we do all that we can. They're finding more and more information. It's not just those with high risk. It's they just released information today from the CDC. We just need to really make sure that we are educated and that we stay flexible, and that we don't just rule anything out, because we may have to change course.
And that, that comment, that word flexible, I feel like is the most important, and that is one of the words that I would say we are above anything else is flexible, and the leadership, I think, has shown us that we're flexible, and gives me hope that we're flexible. So I feel like a plan is great, and I have the confidence that if we need to be flexible and adjust that plan, we will adjust it. My personal opinion.
And I would second that. I mean, we say a lot, at work every day, we're flexible. And in this case, we love to be flexible, but in this case, we don't have a choice but to be prepared to be flexible. As I mentioned several times, we anticipate changes. We know that, like I said, a week from now, we may get different mandates. Right now, we just are receiving guidelines, but we may start receiving mandates, and we are ready to adhere to those mandates as they are passed down.
One of my takeaways from this is that I think the questions are beyond the plan, right? And it may unfortunately stay like that, right? There's always going to be another question, another thought. And that's going to be an ongoing frustration for you, I'm sure. But we can't have all the answers. And if you had all the answers, everything would change anyway. So I appreciate your leadership, and we'll get through it together.
We will. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Smith? Well, thank you very much.
No, but thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your presentations. I'm sure that the board will have more questions, and they'll probably follow up with you directly. If they do follow up with you, if you would share the answers with all the board, and you usually do, but I'm just requesting that.
Absolutely.
And, I know the rest of the board feels that you lead with your heart, and you care for kids, and you love kids, and you wouldn't do anything that would intentionally hurt this community. And so I have confidence that you're listening to experts in the healthcare field and officials that are in charge of making those decisions, and you're making the best decision for our community as possible. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.